A $100 tip became $10,000 in support overnight. When Barron Trump quietly left a generous tip for a struggling waitress, he had no idea what he'd set in motion. The next morning, Sarah woke up to a life-changing surprise. Her story of unexpected kindness went viral, touching hearts across the nation. But the real shocker: what the community did next. Sarah's legs ached as she balanced 3 steaming plates, her brow glistening with sweat. She'd been on her feet for hours, racing between tables with barely a moment to catch her breath. This was her life now, a constant sprint between 2 jobs, trying to keep her head above water as a single mom. As she set down the plates at table 7, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the diner's grimy window. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, a stark reminder of another sleepless night worrying about bills. She forced a smile, pushing away thoughts of the stack of unpaid invoices waiting at home. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah turned to see a well-dressed teenager step inside. The diner fell oddly quiet, save for the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Sarah's coworker, Melissa, sidled up to her, eyes wide. "Is that who I think it is?" she whispered, nodding towards the newcomer. Sarah squinted, trying to place the familiar face. Then it hit her. Barron Trump, the president's son, right here in their tiny diner. She watched as he slid into a booth, his tall frame looking out of place among the worn vinyl seats. As Sarah approached to take his order, she noticed Barron's gaze following her movements. There was something in his expression. Not pity, but a sort of thoughtful curiosity. It made her self-conscious, acutely aware of her frayed uniform and the smudge of ketchup on her apron. Throughout the meal, Sarah felt Barron's eyes on her as she darted between tables. She wondered what he saw. Did he notice the way her smile faltered when she thought no one was looking? Could he sense the weight of worry she carried? When Barron finally requested the check, Sarah's stomach knotted. She'd heard stories of entitled rich kids leaving insulting tips. As she set the bill on his table, she braced herself for disappointment. Barron reached for his wallet, his expression unreadable. Sarah turned away, busying herself with wiping down a nearby table. She didn't want to hover, didn't want to seem expectant. A few minutes later, Sarah returned to collect the check. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the leather folder. She opened it, her eyes widening in disbelief. The tip was nearly equal to the cost of the meal itself. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She blinked rapidly, convinced she must be seeing things wrong. But the numbers didn't change. This wasn't just a generous tip. It was a lifeline. She looked up, wanting to thank Barron, but he was already gone. As Sarah stood there, clutching the check to her chest, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of her financial worries lifted, if only for a moment. She had no idea that this act of kindness was just the beginning of a chain of events that would transform her life completely. Have you ever received a phone call that changed everything? For Sarah, that call came on a Tuesday morning, shattering her understanding of what was possible in a world that had seemed so cruel. Sarah's alarm blared, jolting her from a fitful sleep. She fumbled for her phone, silencing the harsh noise. As she swung her legs over the side of the bed, steeling herself for another grueling day, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her alarm. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. Her heart raced as she answered, expecting another bill collector. Instead, she heard the gruff voice of her landlord, Mr. Thompson. "Sarah?" "It's about your rent," he said, his tone unreadable. Sarah's stomach dropped. She was already behind on payments. Was this the eviction notice she'd been dreading? She gripped the phone tighter, bracing for the worst. "I don't know how to say this," Mr. Thompson continued, "but someone's paid your rent. For the next 6 months. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah sank back onto her bed, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. "What?" she whispered, certain she had misheard. Mr. Thompson explained that an anonymous donor had covered her rent, insisting on remaining unnamed. As Sarah listened, her free hand found the crumpled check from the diner, still tucked in her uniform pocket. "There's a note here for you," Mr. Thompson added. His gruff voice softened as he read, "You're appreciated more than you know." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. For years she'd felt invisible, just another struggling single mom barely keeping her head above water. Now someone had seen her, really seen her, and reached out a helping hand. The weight of constant worry that had become her constant companion began to lift. For the first time in years, Sarah could breathe. She wouldn't have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Her kids wouldn't have to wear shoes with holes for another month. As the reality of this gift sank in, Sarah's mind raced. Who could have done this? Was it connected to the generous tip from yesterday? She thought of Barron Trump, remembering the thoughtful look in his eyes as he watched her work. Over the next few days, word of Sarah's mysterious benefactor spread through the small town like wildfire. Customers at the diner whispered theories, their eyes following Sarah as she moved between tables. Some speculated it was a secret millionaire passing through town. Others wondered if it was the work of a local do-gooder. Sarah found herself at the center of a storm of kindness and curiosity. Regular customers pressed extra tips into her hand, insisting she treat herself to something nice. Co-workers offered to cover shifts so she could spend more time with her kids. As the community buzzed with speculation, Sarah held the truth close to her heart. She didn't need to know the name of her benefactor. What mattered was that someone had cared enough to lift her burden, if only for a little while. And in doing so, they had given her something even more precious than money. Hope. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she peered out the diner window. A white van with a satellite dish on top had just pulled into the parking lot, its side emblazoned with the local news station's logo. Her palms grew clammy as she watched a reporter and cameraman emerge, their eyes scanning the storefront. Inside, a ripple of excitement spread through the diner. Customers nudged each other, craning their necks to get a better look. Sarah's coworker, Melissa, rushed over, her eyes wide. "They're here about you, aren't they?" she whispered. Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the door chimed. The reporter strode in, microphone in hand, her gaze zeroing in on Sarah. "Are you Sarah Thompson?" she asked, her voice carrying through the now silent diner. Sarah nodded, her throat suddenly dry. The reporter's next words hit her like a thunderbolt. "We're here to follow up on Barron Trump's visit last week. Can you tell us about the generous tip he left?" The pieces clicked into place. Sarah's mind reeled as she connected the dots between Barron's visit, the mysterious tip, and the anonymous rent payment. She'd suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed was overwhelming. As Sarah recounted her story, her voice trembling with emotion, she could see the impact it was having on those around her. Customers listened intently, some wiping away tears. The cameraman zoomed in on Sarah's face, capturing her raw vulnerability. Within hours, Sarah's story had spread far beyond the confines of their small town. Local news stations picked it up, the national ones. Social media exploded with shares and comments, people touched by the simple act of kindness that had snowballed into something much bigger. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Sarah's phone began ringing off the hook. Local businesses, inspired by Barron's generosity, wanted to help. The owner of a daycare center offered free childcare for Sarah's kids. The local grocery store pledged a month's worth of groceries. But it didn't stop there. Job offers started pouring in, positions that would allow Sarah to work fewer hours while earning more. She received messages from people all over the country, sharing their own stories of struggle and offering words of encouragement. As the days passed, Sarah's life began to transform. For the first time in years, she found herself with free time, precious hours she could spend with her children. She no longer had to choose between paying bills and buying school supplies. The constant worry that had been her companion for so long began to fade. One evening, as Sarah tucked her kids into bed, something she rarely had the energy to do before, her daughter looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mommy, why are you smiling so much now?" she asked innocently. Sarah paused, her heart full. She realized that Barron Trump's act of kindness hadn't just changed her circumstances. It had reignited her hope, reminding her of the good in the world. And now, that hope was spreading, touching lives far beyond her own. What happens when a single act of kindness snowballs into a movement? Sarah was about to find out. As she stepped up to the microphone, she had no idea her next words would spark a revolution of generosity in her small town. Sarah gazed out at the sea of faces before her in the community center. Her palms were sweaty, her heart racing. Just weeks ago, she'd been an invisible waitress, struggling to make ends meet. Now, here she was, about to address a crowd of expectant townspeople. "I want to organize a food drive," Sarah announced, her voice wavering slightly. "For those who are where I was not too long ago." She paused, gauging the room's reaction. A few people shifted in their seats, exchanging uncertain glances. Sarah saw the doubt creeping into their eyes. Could they really make a difference? She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Let me tell you a story," she began. As Sarah recounted her journey, from the generous tip to the anonymous rent payment to the outpouring of community support, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. Eyes that had been skeptical now shone with interest. Sarah described how a single act of kindness had transformed not just her life, but the lives of her children, how it had given her hope when she'd all but given up. As she spoke, she could see her words taking root, inspiring others to action. The food drive started small, a few boxes in the community center lobby, but word spread quickly. Local businesses, touched by Sarah's story, began to get involved. The grocery store offered to match donations. The high school organized a door-to-door collection drive. Even the local radio station got in on the act, running hourly reminders about the initiative. What had started as a simple idea soon grew beyond anyone's expectations. Donations poured in faster than they could be sorted. Volunteers streamed into the community center, eager to lend a hand. The food drive became a town-wide event, bringing together people from all walks of life. But it didn't stop there. Inspired by the food drive's success, other community initiatives began to take shape. A local mechanic offered free oil changes for single parents. The town's tutoring center expanded its services, providing free after-school help for struggling students. A random acts of kindness challenge swept through the high school, with students competing to outdo each other in generosity. As Sarah watched her town transform, she felt a sense of awe. The wave of generosity that had lifted her out of despair was now touching countless other lives. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now working side by side, united in their desire to make a difference. One evening, as Sarah helped sort through another mountain of donations, she paused to take it all in. The community center buzzed with activity, filled with laughter and conversation. She thought back to that day in the diner, when a young man's simple act of kindness had set all this in motion. Sarah realized then that kindness wasn't just about the giver and the receiver. It was a catalyst, capable of awakening the best in everyone it touched. One act of generosity had sparked a transformation that reached far beyond anything she could have imagined. And it all started with a tip, a gesture that said, "You matter." Sarah stood at the edge of the bustling community center, watching volunteers sort through mountains of donations. The hum of conversation and laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had once defined her struggles. She thought back to that pivotal moment in the diner, when a simple act of kindness had set off a chain reaction of generosity. As she observed the scene before her, Sarah realized that kindness wasn't just a fleeting moment between two people. It was a powerful force, capable of transforming entire communities. Barron Trump's gesture had done more than ease her financial burden. It had reignited hope and inspired a movement. Sarah approached a young volunteer, her eyes bright with determination. "You know," she said softly, "we all have the power to be someone's Barron Trump." The volunteer looked up, curiosity etched on his face. Sarah smiled, her voice steady as she continued. "Sometimes all it takes is one small act to change someone's world. And who knows, that change might just spark a revolution of kindness